Alright, so I think it's important to dive in the Afghanistan papers more because it should be the news story of the century, yet it's being almost completely ignored by the media and our politicians. So let me set the stage really quick. If you remember, the Pentagon Papers were a trove of leaked documents that detailed the lies, deceptions, and failures of the U.S. in Vietnam. It detailed how during press conferences, politicians would lie, say we're doing great, when really we weren't making any progress. It reports how despite the U.S. public being told the war would not be widened in scope, our government at the same time was doing exactly that, broadening our involvement in bombing an ever greater region in Vietnam. So now we have this echo in history with the Afghanistan papers, in which they expose many of the same things. Again, so I wanted to dive a bit more into it for no other purpose than to try my best to convince those small government neocons who were just cheering on a war with Iran that putting trust in the government, and that includes the military, is not the wisest decision and is in fact quite foolish and seems to never fail at biting you right back. So to start, let me apologize. These scanned documents are kind of blurry, but I have to work with what I've got. So the Afghanistan papers reveal the massive waste that goes on with these nation-building endeavors. It was revealed by Douglas Lute, a 3-star general, that in regards to spending, they were spending huge amounts of U.S. taxpayer money appropriated to them on infrastructure projects just so they could say they spent it. He also said that these projects were things that Afghanistan could never sustain or even use in some cases. Lute detailed one of these projects as being in, quote, some godforsaken province, and they basically built a glass facade and an atrium on a USACE building that was already complete. It was simply an ostentatious theatrical performance to use up money. That's really what it boiled down to. We were allocated this money, we don't want next year's budget to be cut, so let's waste it so we can say we needed it to spend. Lute also commented that they were devoid of an understanding of Afghanistan. He asks, what are the demographics of the country? What are the economic drivers? What aid do they need? And then he points out that Haiti is a small country right by the U.S., and it has no extremist insurgency, and we wouldn't be able to build up that nation with $10 billion. So the ability for government to think these things through, even when it comes to the military, seems to be non-existent. If you can't help Haiti, God help you if you try and help Afghanistan. So what else do we have here? Well, it's revealed in 2006 that Donald Rumsfeld received dire warnings about Afghanistan in regard to the Taliban making a strong comeback because of Pakistan, a U.S. ally, and that there was rising unrest against the Afghan government because of its corruption and incompetence. If you read the Afghanistan papers, you generally learn that the Afghan government essentially became a kleptocracy. It was just stealing stuff left and right. Rumsfeld was told that we will encounter some very unpleasant surprises in the coming 24 months. But as usual, it was said that with Rumsfeld's personal blessing, the Pentagon buried the bleak warnings and told the public a very different story. In 2006, Rumsfeld's speechwriters came out with the paper Afghanistan 5 years later that was brimming with optimism. It said that those who say the U.S. has lost its focus don't know what they're talking about. And in regard to this, I'll simply repeat what I mentioned before, that Douglas Lute, the 3-star general, said we had no idea what we were doing in Afghanistan. No defined goal, wasting money, no long-term strategic planning. So it's very revealing when you juxtapose the cheery, rosy, optimistic story being told to the public, yet those who have their own boots on the ground over there are telling a very different story, a story of confusion, incompetence, and lack of focus. But meanwhile, U.S. generals in the media over here are preaching that the war is progressing despite the reality on the battlefield. And this is encapsulated by what was said by Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, in which he said, from ambassadors down to the low level, they all say we are doing a great job. Really? So if we are doing such a great job, why does it feel like we are losing? And then he actually goes on to explain how this happens. He says, to me, this is a really important point. If you go back and look at the mission statements for every battalion and every brigade from the beginning of the war, they are essentially all the same. It is defeat and destroy the enemy and protect the population. This was very true for every battalion commander and every brigade commander from a U.S. side. It is essentially those same two things, defeat the enemy and protect the population. So they all went in for whatever their rotation was, 9 months or 6 months, and were given that mission, accepted that mission, and executed that mission. Then they all said when they left, they accomplished that mission, every single commander. Not one commander is going to leave Afghanistan or Iraq or any place. Not one is going to leave and say, you know what, we didn't accomplish our mission. mission. So the next guy that shows up finds their area screwed up after a great right seat ride. They do their mission analysis once they're on the ground, and then they come back and go, man, this is really bad. But the last battalion, regiment, or BCT accomplished their mission. They have all these wonderful stats about what they did. I'm telling you that this is true from 2002 until today. So what do we get from this? We get a media that has a hyper-effective pair of rose-tinted glasses looking at the situation, so the public is completely left in the dark about how the reality is playing out, because no one is willing to admit, or no one is allowed to admit, that this might be a huge waste and we might have been ineffective. So also going into this tendency to gloss over big picture failures, we have an interview with Bob Crowley, which it states that that might not be his name, but he is a military advisor and a retired Army colonel. In this interview, he says, quote, "Truth was rarely welcome on the CAAT," and the CAAT is the Counterinsurgency Advise and Assist Teams. Everyone at ISAF just wanted to hear good news, so bad news was often stifled. There was more freedom to share bad news if it was small. We're running over kids with our MRAPs, because those things could be changed with policy directives. But when we tried to air larger strategic concerns about the willingness, capacity, or corruption of the Afghan government, it was clear it was not welcome and the boss wouldn't like it. So yes, smaller issues like killing children with MRAPs, which by the way are mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, we could work that out and find a solution, but bigger issues like what the hell are we doing here and what is the end game, those were not welcome inquiries, and when you're not allowed to ask those questions, you know there is a reason. Namely, your higher-ups probably think that's too good of a question, and it has too abysmal of an answer. So moving on, here's Andre Hollis, a business consultant and former Pentagon official, talking about the Department of Defense, in which he says, the DoD fundamentally didn't understand what getting involved in counter-narcotics entailed. Everyone was focusing on traditional roles. They would only talk to those in their battle space. From a DoD perspective, it was tactical and about finding and killing Al-Qaeda. State Department didn't do strategic thinking. Warlords were the only effective form of stability at the time, but the U.S. was schizophrenic about it. They knew those people had different values and morality. They were the bad guys, but we didn't know how to deal with them. It was inconsistent across agencies and within agencies. It lacked strategy of how to help Afghanistan transition to effective government. We were working with a dated model of post-war Europe and Japan. So again, it's more of the same. I've read quite a lot of these papers at this point, and it's simply filled to the brim with officials stating they have no idea what's going on in Afghanistan and that the military efforts are horribly managed by the Department of Defense. And I want to just mention this again. While all this chaos is going on, what are we being told in the media in the U.S. by pundits and politicians? We're being told that Afghanistan is the good war. We're making progress. There's nothing more to see here. Well, there was a lot more to see there, and I'm thankful for the Afghanistan papers because it's simply more proof that you should never trust what you're being told. Pundits and politicians will lie through their teeth, feel no remorse for doing so, and sleep like babies at night. But that is all for now. Like, subscribe, and share this video, and please take it easy.